Hey guys, and welcome back to another lesson. Today we're going to talk about a very powerful idea, which is the chromatic motion of notes. And I always like to demonstrate things, so let me start with that. We're going to, in this lesson, start out with a chord progression, which is fairly simple. It's going to be an E major, A major, D, G, and then B minor, E, A minor, D, finally F, D, G, E, A minor. And when we're done with it, it's going to sound like this. Okay, so before we get into theory and sort of a deeper understanding, I'd like to walk you through exactly what I played so you can replicate it. And this is an important step in learning, any particular concept or idea. So let me just show you which chords I've played. We'll get into the why a bit later. So the first chord is, well, I think of it as an F major over a B flat major. This is what I'd call a polychord. But you could also think of this as a B flat major 9. The second chord is just an A major add 2. The add 2 is this B here. The next chord is a little bit more difficult to name. So I'm actually not going to just try and stick a name on it. We'll get back to a little bit of why I chose this a bit later on. But you can think of this is almost an A flat major in the left hand and an A E flat major in the right hand. So it's almost a polychord, but you also have this A up here. And then you have this G add 2, just a G major add 2. So these are the first four chords. Then the next four chords are this B minor 11, followed by this E dominant 7th with a sharp 5. This C here is the sharp 5. Then an A minor 9. And the fourth chord in this second series is basically an F sharp dominant 7th or dominant 9th with an additional sharp 11th. And then the last group of four chords is just an F major with maybe an add 2 here. You can omit it. Then it goes to an F sharp minor 7 flat 5, to a C major, to an E7 or E dominant 7 sharp 5, and then finally the last bit is not really a chord, it's just me playing with a sort of a double bass, just a G, A, to wrap up the piece. Now, first of all, just sit down at the piano and try to replicate it, and this will in itself already you'll start seeing some patterns. Now, before we get into the analysis of the particular progression I've shown you here, I'd like to start out with an idea that personally sort of blew me away when I first heard it, when I was, getting into music and learning music theory. And this is the following. Let's say you're in the key of C major, and you have these different chords that belong to the key of C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, less often, and then C major. And then a lot of times what you do is you find progressions or ways in which these chords lead into the other. For example, you know that if you're playing an F, it will naturally lead into the G, which would naturally lead into C major. Then as I learned more theory, I learned that this is the fourth degree, the subdominant, which leads naturally into the fifth, the dominant, and then to the tonic, the first degree. And you can think of a lot of modern Western harmony in this way. So you might have there is a famous, for example, progression of a 2-5-1. So a D minor to a G major to a C major is a 2-5-1 in the key of C major, and there are many, many different such examples. And you can understand a lot of Western harmony in thinking in these terms. This is called functional harmony or diatonic harmony. Now, as it turns out, this is one particular way of thinking about harmony, but it's not the only one. It's not the only one of thinking of chord progressions and which chord should lead into another chord. One other way is just by looking at motion, which notes move into which other notes. And chromatic motion is one particular type of motion that is very powerful. For example, now this makes sense, when you hear this. This might be like a, I don't know, like a bit of a song or something. Now, this is not really explained easily using diatonic harmony, because in diatonic harmony there's really no way of understanding why C goes into B, goes into B flat, goes back into B, and then back to C. But when you look at this in terms of the motion involved, it makes perfect sense. You're just moving in semitones up and down. Now, sometimes this produces pleasing effects, and sometimes it doesn't, but it's a different way of thinking about generating and voicing chord progressions. And this is really the big power of thinking in terms of motion and chromatic motion of notes. And what the example I played does is it shows you how this way of thinking actually leads to interesting chord voicings. And now with this sort of understanding under our belt, let's walk through the 3 sections of this chord progression. We have a total of 12 chords, and they're divided into groups of 4, and we're going to walk through all of them. And each of them is going to teach us a different lesson. Let's start with the first set of 4 chords. Now, what I'm doing here, as you might have noticed if you've played this, is I'm starting out with a particular chord, and I'll say a few words as to why down the road, but I'm starting out with a particular chord, and then I'm moving the notes chromatically. Except for the A up here, which stays constant, the other notes move down a semitone, and then another semitone, and then another semitone. Now, we can think about this progression in terms of diatonic harmony, but we'd really have to sort of go out of our way to justify it. However, when we look at the motion involved, the chromatic motion, it makes perfect sense, right? So what I think the correct way of understanding the first set of 4 chords in this progression is just by thinking of this as just a chromatic motion. Now, we are doing one thing, which is keeping this A note up here constant. And this acts as a pedal note. It's sort of, once you get into chromatic motion, you sort of lose your center, the harmonic center of the key that you're in. Sometimes that's good, but sometimes when you want to ground the listener, you want to remind them that there's a key here, then you keep this note, this A, we're playing in the key of A minor or major, this A up here constant as you change your chords. And this provides sort of like a gravity or focus point for the listener. So even when you do something crazy like, they still have this reminder throughout the progression that tells them, hey, we're doing something weird here, but we're going to go back to A sometime in this progression. And you can do a lot of things, by the way, if you keep this pedal note up here. They don't have to be incidentally chromatic, you know. So, I mean, you can just go between different chords and this A will sort of ground them, even if they don't fit together necessarily as just a progression. Now, let's go to the second set of 4 chords. So here we're playing B minor 11, E dominant 7 sharp 5, this A minor 9, and then this, you know, F sharp 9 sharp 11. Now, if you look at the right hand, you see that it's, again, has this pedal note of E up here, and then the other 2 notes just execute chromatic motion. They go down a semitone, both, then they go another semitone, then up. But the left hand actually plays chords. It plays B minor, E dominant 7, A minor, and then F sharp dominant 7. So this is sort of, this particular progression marries together these 2 ideas of diatonic harmony, which is played in the left hand, and this chromatic motion or chromatic approach to harmony in the right hand, as my cat says in the background. So what you're actually doing here, if you look at the left hand, you're just playing a simple B minor to E dominant 7 to A minor to this F sharp dominant 7. So when this progression starts from the B minor 11, then the way chromatic motion plays into this is in the fact that the right hand moves chromatically. And we'll see if we can get through this with the interruptions of this attention-seeking cat. But you basically have these 2 notes go down and up. And this, to be honest, completely honest, was complete experimentation on my part. So when I played this B minor 11th chord, when I started out with this, I told myself, well, I want to move diatonically in the left hand, but I also want to have some sort of chromatic motion in my right hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and move these notes chromatically somehow. So I just tried going down a couple of semitones and then going down again, and it sounded good. Now, for the last chord, when I tried going down again, it fit. I could use this, but I also tried to see what happened when I went up. And I actually liked this sound better. Now it turns out that this is a particular chord, and it does make sense. It's an F sharp 9 sharp 11. But in reality, I'd like to think of this as, even if it didn't make any sense, the fact I sort of came across this chord just by exploring chromatic motion of my notes. So this is one particular way in which chromatic motion can help you sort of explore how to create or voice a chord progression. We started out from a boring sounding B minor, E, A minor, D, and we ended up with a B minor, which sounded better, to an E that sounded better, to an A minor that sounded better, and then a D substitution which sounded better. The last part of the progression is one which is completely diatonic. It's F to D to G to E sharp to A minor. And what I've done here is instead of moving the bass note to hit the root of the chord, what I've done is I've moved the bass note chromatically. And I've slightly changed the chords to sound a little bit more interesting. So, I've done this F major add 2, this F sharp minor 7 flat 5, C instead of a G, but I could have equally done a G here. And then instead of just an E, I did this E dominant 7 sharp 5. Now this represents a case where you're thinking diatonically, but you still have some chromatic motion you're trying to have some part moving chromatically. And this could be the bass usually, or it could be maybe the top note or something like that. For example, you know, maybe if you have this kind of chord progression where you have F, B flat, G, and C. So you see that the topmost note moves chromatically. Okay, so that's another way in which you can add chromatic motion, but think diatonically, because the progression F to B flat to G to C is really a progression in the key of C major, and you know, you can think of it in terms of, you know, the B flat is a borrowed chord, and the F just goes to the C, goes to the G, goes to the C, but has this B flat in the middle. But the basic idea here is that you're thinking diatonically and you're adding interesting motion with chromatic motion. And this happens in a lot of songs. For example, you know, there are many famous chord progressions or voicing progressions that use or think in terms of chromatic motion. For example, think of this A minor going to an A flat augmented, going to a C major. This would be, in my opinion, a D dominant ninth, and then maybe an F major 7, A minor, B major, this would be an E major over bass of D, which is really an E dominant 7 in a sense. So you can see how I moved chromatically with the bass, and that was really sort of the central idea of the chord progression. It wasn't really as much as, you know, an A minor going to an A flat augmented going to a C. If I were to, you know, just play these chords without thinking of the chromatic motion, they would sound kind of weird. So in the root position, say. So, I mean, they sound okay, but really the selling point of this progression is the chromatic motion of the bass. And again, this presents a case where thinking chromatically within the framework of diatonic harmony can lead to some interesting voicings and progressions. And these things sometimes come together, you know, sometimes the progression in itself is not interesting, but the progression plus the chromatic motion is interesting, as you've just seen. Now, before I sign off, I do have to tell you one thing, which is how on earth did I start with this chord here? Right, because in the original progression I have an E going to an A. So where does this F over B flat come from? Well, the way I think of this is there's a thing called a tritone substitution, and it tells you that whichever chord you're playing, a major chord, and it also works in minor chords actually, you can play the major chord which is a tritone away, which is 6 semitones. So starting from E, you can count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and end up with this B flat. So instead of playing an E major to an A major, you can play a B flat major to an A major. And the way I chose to play this B flat major was I played it in the left hand. This is the first inversion, and I added this F up here. And you can think of this as higher degrees. So, you know, this is the 5th, this is the 7th, the major 7th, and this is like an add 2 or a 9th. Or you can think of this as a polychord, you know, a B flat and an F. I experimented with many different other combinations before settling on this one, because not only it sounded best to my ears, but it also lended itself most naturally to this chromatic motion. So I tried, for example, B flat over an A flat, and just moving here. It doesn't sound horrible, but it also sounds a little bit too dissonant to my ears. And this had just the right mixture of consonance and dissonance. And it also allowed me to keep this, top pedal note of A, because I'm in the key of A. So that's it really. I hope you've, sort of opened your mind to thinking about chord progressions and harmony in a new way, and that you'll make good use of it in your own playing, and of course that you've learned something interesting. And I'll see you next time.